My name is Frances Martinez. While my daughter celebrated the most expensive wedding in the city without inviting me, I was secretly becoming a multi-millionaire. And that same night, I decided I would never tell her. If you want to hear the shocking conclusion to this story, subscribe now, because what's coming will leave you speechless. After 37 desperate calls from my daughter in 3 days, I knew I had made the right decision. But for you to understand why this choice changed my life forever, I need to tell you how I got to that point. It all started exactly 6 months ago, on a Saturday I will never forget. It was 3:47 inches the afternoon when I got the call that shattered my soul. "Mom, I've decided the wedding will just be for close family and intimate friends," Sarah told me, with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. 25 years of raising her alone. 25 years of being her only support. And now I didn't qualify as close family. "What are you saying, sweetie?" I asked, feeling my world fall apart. "You're my only family." "It's just that." "Well, Mom, you know how things are now. Richard's family has certain expectations. It's a very elegant wedding and—" Her voice trailed off, but the message was clear. My daughter was ashamed of me. For years I confused being used with being loved. For years I paid for the affection that should have been free. But that afternoon, as I hung up the phone with trembling hands, something inside me broke for good. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Attorney Johnson, his voice barely containing his excitement. "Miss Martinez, I need you to come to my office immediately. It's about your Uncle Robert's inheritance in the United States. It's something extraordinary." When I arrived at his office, the words that came out of his mouth changed my life. "Miss Martinez, you have just inherited $13 million. My first impulse was to run and tell Sarah, to share that incredible joy with the only person I loved in this world. I took out my phone, dialed her number. But before the first ring, I remembered her words from that afternoon. "You don't qualify as close family." In that moment, I made the most important decision of my life. I wouldn't tell her anything. Absolutely nothing. The next 3 days were the most revealing of my existence. While Sarah celebrated her dream wedding at the most exclusive club in the city, I was at home, completely alone. But for the first time in years, I felt a strange inner peace. It was then that I started doing something I had never done before. A real inventory of our relationship. I took out all the receipts, all the bank transfers, all the statements from the last 5 years. The number left me breathless. I had spent over $200,000 on her. Her apartment, her car, her wedding, her whims, all paid for by me, while she treated me like an inconvenient obligation. I started to remember all the times I had canceled my plans to be available for her, all the times I had worked overtime to cover her expenses, all the times I had felt lonely on important holidays because she was too busy to visit. On the 3rd day after her wedding, while I was organizing these documents on my table, I heard the desperate sound of someone pounding on my door as if their life depended on it. When I opened it, there was Sarah, her eyes swollen from crying, her hair a mess, and in her trembling hands, a yellow envelope that I recognized immediately. "Mom," she said in a broken voice, "I need to talk to you, urgently." But I had changed. I was no longer the woman desperate for her approval that I had been for so many years. Now, I was someone who knew her own worth. Someone who had learned that self-love is worth more than any relationship that humiliates you. "Come in," I said calmly, knowing that what was about to happen would define the future of our relationship forever. That yellow envelope contained something that would change everything between us. Something that would make me understand that sometimes silence is the most powerful answer you can give. To fully understand why that inheritance arrived at that exact moment, I need to take you back with me, to the years where it all began. Sarah was just 8 years old when her father decided that being a husband and a dad wasn't compatible with his dreams of freedom. One morning, he was just gone, leaving only a note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore. Take care of her." I was left completely alone with a little girl who cried every night asking for her daddy. I worked as an accountant at a small firm, earning just enough to keep our modest 2-bedroom apartment. But from that first day, I swore to myself that Sarah would never feel like she was missing anything. The first few years were the hardest financially, but they were also the most beautiful emotionally. Sarah was my constant companion. We went to the park on Sundays, we cooked together on weekends, and at night I would read her stories until she fell asleep. "Mom, "You're my hero," she would say, hugging me tight. Those words were worth more than all the gold in the world. When she turned 15, things started to change subtly. Her friends at the private school, where I had managed to enroll her with great effort, had wealthy parents, elegant houses, imported cars. Sarah started to feel different, and I, without realizing it, began to compensate for that difference with money I didn't have. I got a second job on weekends, tutoring college students in math. Every extra dollar went directly to Sarah's whims. The designer clothes she wanted, the latest model phone, the expensive outings with her friends. I lived on the bare minimum, but she had everything she asked for. During her teenage years, I worked up to 18 hours a day. While other mothers rested, I was preparing tax returns for private clients late into the night. My health began to suffer, but every time I saw Sarah's smile when I gave her something new, I felt it was worth it. When it was time to choose a university, she naturally wanted the most expensive and prestigious one in the city. The tuition was equivalent to 8 months of my entire salary. I had to mortgage the apartment that had cost me so much to get, but I did it without a second thought. It's for her future, I repeated to myself every morning as I got up at 5 to start another exhausting day. During her college years, the expenses multiplied exponentially. It wasn't just the tuition. It was the imported textbooks, the constant outings, the clothes to fit in with her upper-class friends, the car she needed so she wouldn't feel inferior. Every month, I transferred almost my entire salary to her account, living on instant noodles and watered-down coffee myself. But the most painful part wasn't the financial sacrifice. It was the gradual transformation of our relationship. Daily calls became weekly, then monthly. Visits home became so spaced out they turned into sporadic appearances, usually when she needed something urgently. Money for a trip, help with an unforeseen expense, or just someone to solve problems she had created herself. She met Richard in her senior year of college, the son of millionaire entrepreneurs, accustomed to a standard of living I could never provide. At first, I thought it was just a fling, but I soon realized that Sarah had found exactly what she was looking for, a life without financial limitations. The family introductions were especially humiliating. I vividly remember the first dinner at Richard's parents' house. Sarah asked me to buy a new suit because the one I had wasn't appropriate. I spent the equivalent of a month's worth of groceries on that outfit I only wore once. During dinner, she introduced me simply as my mom, without mentioning the sacrifices I had made for her, without talking about the unconditional love I had always given her. That night, as I rode the public bus home because I didn't have money for a taxi, I understood that I had lost my daughter long before I physically lost her. I had lost her the day I decided that buying her love was easier than teaching her to value genuine love. The last 2 years before her wedding were a constant parade of increasingly extravagant expenses. The new apartment she needed to live with Richard, decorated entirely with my money. The latest model car that was essential for her new social position. The expensive trips she documented on social media while I worked extra shifts to pay for them. Each bank transfer was met with less gratitude and more demands. "Mom, it's urgent," had become her favorite phrase. It was never, "Thanks, Mom," or "How are you, Mom?" It was always an immediate need that I had to solve. The planning of her wedding was the last straw. I spent $30,000 on a celebration where I was not welcome. I paid for flowers I wouldn't see, for music I wouldn't hear, for food I wouldn't taste. It was like financing my own humiliation. But that Saturday afternoon, when she told me I didn't qualify as close family, something inside me finally woke up. For the first time in 25 years, I asked myself, when was the last time Sarah asked me how I was? When was the last time she worried about my health, my happiness, my dreams? The answer was terrifying. Never. The changes began so gradually that at first I justified them as a natural part of her growing up. It was easier to convince myself that my daughter was maturing than to accept the painful reality that I was losing her forever. It all started during her sophomore year of college. Our daily phone conversations, which had been the most sacred ritual of our lives, began to get suspiciously shorter. Where we once talked for hours about everything and nothing, I now got one-word answers. "Yes, Mom. No, Mom. It's fine, Mom." The first truly alarming sign came on my 48th birthday. I had planned an intimate dinner at home, personally preparing her favorite childhood dish, homemade lasagna. I bought a bottle of wine that cost me the equivalent of 3 days' worth of lunches. I decorated the table with candles and waited. At 8 o'clock, I received a text message. Mom, something came up with my friends. We'll celebrate tomorrow, okay? Love you. I spent that night alone, staring at the untouched lasagna, the candles slowly melting, wondering when I had stopped being a priority in the most important person's life. That tomorrow never came. The following months brought a cascade of creative excuses. She had super important exams every time I invited her to lunch. She was exhausted from college when I suggested going to the movies on weekends. Her urgent group projects always mysteriously coincided with the dates I had set aside for us. But what really broke my heart was discovering by chance that on those days she was too busy to see me. She was at luxury shopping malls with her new friends, documenting every moment on social media. There was my daughter, radiant and happy, buying expensive clothes with the money I faithfully sent her every month. The evolution of the language she used with me was another devastating indicator. The affectionate words we had always shared began to disappear. Mommy became mom, then a cold hello. The love you so much at the end of our conversations turned into awkward silences before hanging up. I tried to address the issue directly one Sunday afternoon. Sarah, I feel like we're losing our connection, I said during one of her rare visits. Her response was like a dagger. Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. I'm just growing up. It's normal. Normal. That word became her automatic response to any concern I expressed. It was normal that she no longer wanted to spend time with me. It was normal for her to prefer the company of strangers over her own mother's. It was normal for her to treat me like an emotional ATM. The gifts I bought her, once received with genuine joy, began to be evaluated with a cold, calculating eye. The pretty sweater I saw in the window and bought thinking of her was no longer enough. Now it needed to be a certain brand, a certain price, a certain social status. I vividly remember the day I gave her a silver necklace I had chosen with so much love. She glanced at it for a few seconds before commenting, "It's nice, Mom, but you know I'm allergic to silver. I need white gold, minimum." She wasn't allergic to silver. She had worn silver jewelry for years. She had simply raised her standards to levels I couldn't easily afford. Her visits home became disguised critical inspections. Seemingly innocent comments about the outdated furniture, the old-fashioned decor, the lack of modern technology. "Mom, you should really update this place," she would say, as if I had the money I spent on her monthly to remodel my home. The straw that broke the camel's back came during the Christmas holidays of her junior year. I had saved for months to buy her a special gift, a latest generation tablet she had mentioned needing for her studies. When she unwrapped it on December 25th, her reaction was disheartening. "Thanks, Mom," she said with a forced smile. "Although I think this brand isn't the best on the market anymore. My friends have the other brand, which is much more efficient." Then she added, almost as if thinking aloud, "I guess I can exchange it at the store." That night, while cleaning up the wrapping paper scattered around the living room, I found the receipt for the white gold necklace I had bought her the week before, spending the money I had set aside to fix the leak in my bedroom ceiling. The price was double what my inadequate tablet had cost. The comments about my lifestyle became more frequent and less subtle. "Mom, you don't still take the public bus, do you? It's so inconvenient. Mom, you should think about moving to a better neighborhood. This one isn't safe anymore. Mom, that restaurant we went to last week was very basic. There are much better places." Each suggestion came with implicit expenses that I was supposed to cover. An apartment in a better neighborhood meant tripling the rent. Giving up public transportation meant buying a car and paying for insurance, gas, and maintenance. The better restaurants cost what I spent on food for a whole week. The most painful part was realizing that these criticisms didn't come from a genuine concern for my well-being, but from the shame my modest financial status caused her. It was as if my lifestyle was a negative reflection on her, something that needed to be corrected so it wouldn't affect her new social image. The introductions to her college friends became exercises in disguised humiliation. She would introduce me with cold, technical facts. "This is my mom. She's an accountant," never mentioning the sacrifices I had made for her, never speaking of the unconditional love I had always given her. During those social gatherings, I was clearly the odd one out. While her friends talked about international travel, imported cars, and expensive plans, I remained silent, aware that any comment about my financial reality could embarrass her. But perhaps the clearest sign that something was fundamentally broken in our relationship came on her graduation day. After 4 years of extreme sacrifices to pay for her education, after mortgaging my future to secure hers, Her thank you speech during the family dinner mentioned all the people who made this achievement possible, but my name never left her lips. That night, I understood that I had become the silent financier of a life that no longer included me emotionally. Richard Villanueva appeared in our lives like a golden hurricane that changed absolutely everything. The first time Sarah told me about him, her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen since her childhood. But this time, it wasn't the sparkle of genuine happiness. It was the dazzled fascination of someone who had just discovered a completely different world. "Mom, I met someone incredible," she told me over the phone that March afternoon. Her voice had a strange, almost feverish excitement. "His family has international companies. They travel all over the world. They have houses in 3 different countries. It's like a fairy tale." I should have paid more attention to her words. She didn't tell me how kind Richard was, or how much he made her laugh, or the values they shared. She told me about his money, his status, the opportunities he represented. My daughter had found her golden ticket to a life she had always envied from a distance. The first few months of that relationship were like watching an accelerated metamorphosis. Sarah began to change the way she dressed, spoke, and even walked. She adopted gestures I didn't recognize, expressions that sounded artificial coming from her, and entirely new interests she had never shown before. "Richard is teaching me about wines," she told me during one of our dinners, which now took place in expensive restaurants she chose. "He says it's important to know about these things to move in certain social circles." As she spoke, she gestured in a studied way, as if rehearsing a role in a play. The most notable transformation occurred in her vocabulary. Words she had never used started appearing constantly in her conversations. Networking, lifestyle, status, social positioning. It was as if she had learned a completely new language, designed specifically to distance herself from her origins. Her musical tastes changed drastically. The girl who grew up listening to pop music, who danced with me in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, now only talked about opera and classical music. "It's what you listen to at important cultural events," she explained with a superiority that chilled me to the bone. The physical changes were just as dramatic. Her naturally wavy hair was straightened to perfection. Her nails, which she had always kept short and natural, were elongated with expensive extensions. Her tan skin, a heritage from my side of the family, was lightened with treatments that I financed without fully understanding what they were for. "I need to invest in my personal image," she would say every time she presented me with a new bill for some cosmetic treatment. "Richard is used to a certain type of woman. I can't disappoint him." Those words hurt me more than any direct insult. My daughter was changing her very essence to fit someone else's mold. Her lifelong friends were gradually abandoned. The girls she had grown up with, studied with, and shared dreams with for years suddenly became people who no longer contribute to my personal growth. It was painful to watch her discard authentic relationships for superficial but financially convenient connections. The first time she brought Richard to dinner at my house was a traumatic experience. I prefer to remember in small doses. He arrived impeccably dressed, driving a car that cost more than my apartment, with a rehearsed smile that never reached his eyes. Throughout the evening, he examined our home with the cold curiosity of an anthropologist studying a primitive tribe. "Sarah has told me so much about you," he said with mechanical politeness. "It's admirable how you've raised her with such limited resources." The pause before limited was deliberate, calculated to make me feel exactly what I felt: inadequate, insufficient, ashamed of my own reality. After that dinner, Sarah called me to talk about the experience. "Mom, Richard was impressed with your effort," she began, "and I knew something terrible was coming, but I think it would be better if we met at a restaurant next time. That way, no one feels uncomfortable. No one feels uncomfortable. As if my own home was a source of shame that needed to be hidden. As if the 20-something years of happy memories etched into those walls had no value compared to the comfort of a stranger who judged me by my bank account." In the following months, I witnessed Sarah completely adopt the Villanueva family's values. Her conversations filled with references to exclusive brands, exotic destinations, and elite social events. It was as if she had deliberately erased every trace of the humble girl I had raised with so much love. "The Villanuevas are helping me expand my perspective," she explained when I asked why she no longer visited the neighborhood where we had lived for years. "It's important to surround yourself with successful people if you want to grow professionally." Every word was like a small stab, a reminder that I represented the exact opposite of success in her new definition. Her relationship with money was completely transformed. The girl who had grown up understanding the value of every dollar, who had watched me carefully calculate every expense, now spoke of huge sums with a terrifying naturalness. "It's just money, Mom," became her response whenever I showed concern about some excessive expense. The most devastating part was watching her begin to reinterpret our shared history. The sacrifices I had made for her became limitations you imposed on me without asking. The unconditional love I had given her transformed into overprotection that didn't prepare me for the real world. Our close mother-daughter relationship was redefined as an unhealthy emotional dependency. It was as if she were deliberately rewriting the most precious memories of my life, painting them in gray colors to justify her new golden reality. The dedicated mother became the obstacle she had overcome. The years of struggle together transformed into a dark era she preferred to forget. The point of no return came when she told me, with a coldness I had never known in her, "Mom, Richard and I have been talking about my past, and we've decided it's better to focus on my future. Constantly talking about our previous financial struggles doesn't add anything positive to my new stage in life." My daughter had decided to erase me from her personal narrative. I was no longer the hero of her story. I was the embarrassing chapter she preferred to skip when telling her life story to others. That night, I understood that I had forever lost the Sarah I knew, and in her place was a stranger who shared her face but not her heart. Over the next few months, I clung desperately to the hope of getting my daughter back. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. Every effort to get closer to her just pushed her further away. But my love as a mother blinded me to the obvious reality. Sarah had already made her decision, and I was not part of her future plans. My first attempts were pathetically obvious. I started inviting her to places I knew she would like according to her new standards. I booked tables at expensive restaurants that emptied my bank account, thinking that if I impressed her with luxuries, I could compete with Richard's world. It was an impossible game to win, but my desperation prevented me from seeing it. "What a surprise, Mom," she said when I took her to the most exclusive restaurant in the city. But her surprise wasn't one of joy, it was of awkward curiosity. Throughout the dinner, she studied me as if I were a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Since when do you come to places like this?" she finally asked, and in her tone, I detected something that broke my heart. Suspicion. I tried to change the way I dressed, buying suits I couldn't afford, shoes from well-known brands, watches that represented months of savings. I thought that if I looked more appropriate, according to her new criteria, maybe she would include me in her life again. But Sarah wasn't stupid. She noticed the changes immediately, and her reaction was devastating. "Mom, you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not," she said with a condescension that hurt me more than any shout. "I accept you as you are." But her actions completely contradicted her words. She accepted me enough to take my money, but not enough to include me in her new social reality. I decided to try a different strategy, show genuine interest in her new world. I started reading about wines, art, culture, conversation topics I overheard in her phone calls with Richard. I spent entire nights studying as if it were a college exam, memorizing information I thought would help me connect with her. The first time I tried to join one of her conversations about contemporary art, the result was humiliating. I had practiced clever comments about an exhibition I knew she had visited, but when I voiced them, Sarah looked at me with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment that I will never forget. "Oh, Mom," she said with a nervous laugh, "it's better if you talk about what you really know." Richard, who was on speakerphone during that call, let out a laugh that was meant to sound friendly, but was clearly mocking my pathetic efforts to fit into his circle. My attempts to create new traditions that suited her sophisticated tastes failed miserably. I suggested taking her to classical music concerts, art exhibitions, experimental plays. Every invitation was met with elaborate but transparent excuses. "I'd love to, Mom, but that very day I have a super important commitment with Richard's family." What hurt the most was discovering through her social media that on those same days she was too busy to join me. She was doing the exact activities I had proposed, but with other people. There was my daughter at the theater, at concerts, in art galleries, smiling radiantly next to the Villanuevas, while I stayed home looking at the pictures from a distance. I tried to get closer through increasingly expensive and elaborate gifts. I spent my emergency fund on a diamond bracelet for her birthday. The reaction was disappointing. A mechanical "thanks, Mom," and an immediate question about whether I had the receipt to exchange it for something more my style. When I bought her a weekend at a luxury spa, thinking we could spend quality time together like in the old days, she immediately asked if she could bring a friend instead. "It's just that these places are more fun in a group, you know," she explained, as if I were too boring to accompany her. My efforts to take an interest in her professional career were also frustrating. Sarah had started working at the Villanueva family company, a position she had obviously gotten because of her relationship with Richard, not on her own merit. When I tried to ask her about her job responsibilities, her answers were vague and evasive. "It's very complicated to explain, Mom," she would say when I showed genuine curiosity about her work. "It's high-level corporate strategy." But I had been an accountant for decades. I understood business more than she thought. Her confusing explanations made it clear that even she didn't really understand what she was doing in that office. I then decided to try connecting with Richard directly, thinking that if I could establish a cordial relationship with him, I might regain access to my daughter's life. It was perhaps the most humiliating decision I made during that entire period. I invited him to lunch, just the two of us, with the excuse of getting to know the man who makes my daughter happy. Richard accepted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And for 2 hours, he subjected me to the most subtle and cruel interrogation I had ever experienced. His questions seemed innocent on the surface, but were designed to expose my financial and social limitations. "In what part of the city do you live, Francis? What kind of investments do you manage? Do you have any plans for professional expansion?" My every answer was met with a condescending, "uh-huh," that made me feel smaller. At the end of that lunch, Richard delivered the final blow with an icy smile. "Francis, I want you to know that I greatly respect what you've done for Sarah. Raising her alone with limited resources takes a lot of character. But she's in a different stage of her life now, and I think it's important that she has space to grow." Space to grow. An elegant euphemism for telling me I was in the way, that I was an obstacle in their plans for my daughter's future. And the most painful part was that Sarah clearly agreed with that perspective. My last desperate attempt was to organize a family reunion with my siblings, thinking that perhaps remembering her family roots would help her value our ties again. Sarah's response was brutal in its simplicity. "Mom, I don't have time for those gatherings anymore. My life is somewhere else now." That night, looking at myself in the mirror of my humble bathroom, I finally accepted the truth I had been avoiding for months. My daughter had discarded me, and no effort on my part would change that reality. Saturday, October 15th, will be a date seared into my memory for the rest of my existence. Not just because it was the day my daughter got married without inviting me, but because it was the exact same day that fate decided to change my life in the most unexpected way possible. I woke up at 5 inches the morning, as I had all that week. Insomnia had me in its grip ever since Sarah definitively confirmed I wouldn't be at her ceremony. I had spent entire nights imagining what that day would be like. The flowers I had paid for but wouldn't see. The music I had financed but wouldn't hear. The joy I had paid for, but from which I would be excluded. I decided not to stay home torturing myself with thoughts of what I was losing. I went for a walk in the park where I used to take Sarah when she was little, seeking some comfort in those memories of happier times. Every bench, every path, every tree reminded me of moments when we were inseparable, when I was her undisputed hero. Around 10 inches the morning, while I was sitting on our favorite bench feeding pigeons as we used to on Sundays, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with an international code. Normally, I would have ignored the call, but something prompted me to answer. "Miss Frances Martinez?" a professional voice asked in English with an American accent. "This is Attorney Johnson from Miami. I need to speak with you urgently about the will of your uncle, Robert Martinez." My Uncle Robert had immigrated to the United States when I was a teenager. We kept in touch sporadically for years, but had completely lost contact with him over a decade ago. I knew he had worked in real estate, but I never imagined he had prospered significantly. "Miss Martinez, I'm sorry to inform you that your uncle passed away 3 months ago," the lawyer continued. "We've been trying to locate you because you are the sole heir mentioned in his will. Would it be possible for you to come to Miami this week to formalize the documents?" I explained that I didn't have the resources to travel internationally on such short notice. His response changed my perspective immediately. "Miss Martinez, I don't think you understand the magnitude of this inheritance. Your uncle has left you an estate valued at approximately $13 million US. The world around me stood still. The pigeons continued pecking at crumbs at my feet. Couples continued strolling along the path. Children played on the swings. But for me, everything froze. $13 million. A figure I couldn't fully process at that moment. Could you repeat that amount, please? I managed to articulate in a trembling voice. $13 million, Miss Martinez. Your uncle invested wisely in commercial properties in Miami during the real estate boom. He also had stocks in several tech companies that appreciated exponentially in recent years. While the lawyer explained the technical details of the inheritance, my mind couldn't stop thinking about the devastating irony of the situation. The very day my daughter excluded me from her life for considering me financially inadequate, I was secretly becoming a multimillionaire. I returned home in a state of absolute shock. I turned on the television looking for a distraction, but the images tortured me. It was Saturday afternoon, exactly the time Sarah would be arriving at the most exclusive venue in the city for the ceremony she had dreamed of for months. At 4 o'clock, the exact time the wedding was set to begin, I received another call from Attorney Johnson. Miss Martinez, I've spoken with my colleagues here in Miami, and we can handle much of the documentation via email and video conference. We would only need you to come to sign the final documents. Over the next 2 hours, while my daughter was exchanging wedding vows financed with my money, I was on a video conference call signing documents that officially made me one of the wealthiest people I knew. The temptation to call Sarah immediately was overwhelming. I imagined her reaction upon discovering that the inadequate mother she had excluded from her wedding was now richer than the entire Villanueva family combined. I pictured her shock, her regret, her desperate apologies. But as I held the phone in my hands, I remembered her exact words. You don't qualify as close family. I remembered years of slights, humiliations, and financial exploitation. I remembered how she had systematically discarded me from her new life. In that moment, I made the most important decision of my entire existence. I wouldn't tell her anything. Absolutely nothing. That night, while Sarah was celebrating her honeymoon at a Caribbean resort that I had partially funded, I stayed awake until dawn processing my new reality. I had the financial power to completely change the rules of the game between us, but I had chosen to remain silent. For the first time in decades, I felt completely free. I no longer needed to work extra shifts to afford her whims. I no longer had to sacrifice my well-being to finance her lifestyle. I was no longer the desperate mother begging for crumbs of affection from her ungrateful daughter. I decided to take a week's vacation, something I hadn't done in years. I booked a suite at the most luxurious hotel in the city, the same one where the Villanueva family hosted their international guests. I dined at restaurants I once considered unattainable. I bought clothes I actually liked, not what I thought would impress others. During those days of deep reflection, I understood that the inheritance wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom to discover who I was beyond being Sarah's sacrificial mother. Freedom to set healthy boundaries. Freedom to demand respect instead of begging for it. The following Friday, exactly 1 week after her wedding, Sarah called me from her honeymoon. Her voice sounded forcedly cheerful, with that artificiality she had learned to use when she needed something from me. Mom, how are you? The wedding was beautiful, exactly as we planned. Too bad you couldn't be there. Not even an apology, not even an acknowledgement of how cruel she had been to me. I'm glad it was special for you, I replied with a calmness that surprised myself. I was no longer the woman desperate for her approval. I no longer needed to pretend her exclusion hadn't hurt me. Mom, Richard and I are thinking about some investments when we get back. Maybe we could talk about some interesting opportunities. Code 4, I need more of your money. Sarah, when you get back from your trip, I think we need to have an important conversation about our future, I said calmly. There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she replied, Is everything okay, Mom? You sound different. I was different. I was a woman who knew her true worth, both financially and personally. But she wouldn't know that until I decided to reveal it. If I ever did. The 3 days following my phone call with Sarah were the most eye-opening of my adult life. For the first time in decades, I had the power to radically change our relationship dynamic, but I consciously chose to keep my new financial status an absolute secret. This decision wasn't impulsive. It was the result of deep reflection that transformed me as a person. The first temptation came on Monday morning. I had slept poorly, repeatedly waking up with fantasies of revealing my inheritance. I imagined calling Sarah to say, Honey, I have something important to tell you. I pictured her reaction, her immediate regret, her desperate apologies when she realized she had cast aside a millionaire over social prejudices. But when I actually picked up the phone, something stopped me. It was an inner voice I had never heard before, a mental clarity that cut through my wounded emotions. Why would I want my daughter to love me for my bank account when she had refused to love me for who I truly was? I decided to conduct a mental experiment that changed my entire approach. I asked myself, if Sarah discovered my new fortune and immediately returned to my life with renewed affection, would that affection be genuine? The answer was obvious and painful. She would be loving my money, not me. It would be the same toxic relationship as always, but with the roles reversed. That understanding led me to a second, even deeper question. What kind of mother had I been all these years? By honestly analyzing my behavioral patterns, I recognized an uncomfortable truth. I had used money as a substitute for authentic love, as a way to buy my daughter's presence in my life. Every bank transfer had been a desperate attempt to keep her close. Every expensive gift was my way of saying, "Please, don't abandon me." I had inadvertently created a transactional relationship where my value as a mother was directly tied to my ability to provide financial benefits. During those days of reflection, I began to see my inheritance not as an opportunity for revenge or reconquest, but as a definitive test. If I remained silent, I could finally learn Sarah's true feelings for me, stripped of any financial motivation. On Tuesday, I received a call from Richard that confirmed my darkest suspicions. His voice had that forced familiarity I had learned to recognize as manipulation disguised as cordiality. "Francis, I hope you're doing well. Sarah mentioned you wanted to have an important conversation when they return from their honeymoon. I just wanted to make sure there are no misunderstandings between us." The call lasted 20 minutes, but its purpose was clear. Richard was assessing whether I posed any threat to his future plans with my daughter. His seemingly casual questions explored my emotional stability, my financial situation, and my intentions regarding my relationship with Sarah. "You know Sarah loves you very much," he said toward the end of the conversation, "but it's also important for everyone to understand that she is building a new life. Sometimes it's necessary to adjust expectations to maintain family harmony." Adjust expectations. Another elegant euphemism for telling me I should settle for crumbs of attention from my own daughter. What Richard didn't know was that I no longer needed to adjust anything. For the first time in years, I had total control of the situation. That same afternoon, I made a decision that sealed my strategy. I opened a completely new bank account at a different bank, transferring my entire inheritance there. My original account would only hold my regular salary as an accountant, preserving the appearance of my modest financial situation. On Wednesday, I experienced something I hadn't felt in decades: genuine peace of mind. I walked through the streets of my humble neighborhood, seeing everything with completely new eyes. I had the financial power to move to any exclusive district in the city, but I chose to stay exactly where I was. My value as a person did not depend on my zip code. I had lunch at the small family restaurant where I had taken Sarah hundreds of times during her childhood. The owner, Miss Linda, greeted me with the genuine affection I had forgotten existed. "Francis, what a joy to see you. How is little Sarah? We haven't seen her around here in a long time." Her innocent question made me reflect on something fundamental. I had spent so much time obsessed with winning my daughter's approval that I had completely neglected the authentic relationships I already had in my life. Miss Linda had known me for 15 years. She had seen my struggles, my sacrifices, and had never judged me for my financial limitations. During those 3 days, I established a set of personal rules that would guide my new life. Rule 1. I would never again use money to buy affection or attention. Rule 2. The people in my life would have to value me for who I was, not for what I could materially offer them. Rule 3. I would keep my inheritance a secret until I was completely sure of the real motivations of those around me. The 4th rule was the hardest of all. If Sarah came back into my life seeking financial help, I would listen with compassion, but I would set clear boundaries and specific conditions for any future support. I would no longer be the desperate mother who said yes to everything for fear of abandonment. On Thursday evening, while organizing my old financial documents, I found something that broke my heart. A letter Sarah had written to me when she was 12 for Mother's Day. "Mom, you're the best mom in the world. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you like you take care of me. I love you with all my heart." That letter had been tucked away in my wallet for over a decade. I had read it hundreds of times during my toughest moments, reminding me why every sacrifice was worth it. Now, I reread it with a completely different perspective, wondering when exactly the transformation from that loving little girl to the cold woman who excluded me from her wedding had begun. That night, I made the final decision on how to handle my silence. I would not reveal my inheritance until I was completely convinced that Sarah had rediscovered her ability to love me genuinely without financial motives. It could take months, years, or maybe it would never happen. But for the first time in my adult life, I had the patience and emotional strength to wait. On Friday, exactly 1 week after her wedding, when Sarah called me from her honeymoon with that veiled request for interesting investments, I was already a completely transformed woman. I had $13 million in the bank, but more importantly, I had regained something I had lost years ago, my personal dignity and self-respect. The conversation we would have upon her return would not be the desperate plea of a rejected mother, but the firm establishment of boundaries by a woman who finally knew her own worth. The 3 days that passed between my phone call with Sarah from her honeymoon and her return to the city were a period of such profound introspection that I literally reinvented myself as a person. It was as if I had been living in an emotional fog for decades and had finally found the mental clarity needed to see my life with complete honesty. The first day, I dedicated myself entirely to reviewing every document, every photograph, every physical memento of our mother-daughter relationship. I took out all the boxes from the closet where I kept Sarah's memories, her childhood drawings, her school report cards, the letters she wrote me when she was little, the receipts for every gift I had bought her over the last 10 years. I spread everything out on the dining room table and began to organize it chronologically. What I discovered was devastating but enlightening. There was a clear timeline marking the deterioration of our relationship, and curiously, it coincided exactly with the moment I began compensating for my emotional absence with increasingly expensive gifts. Until Sarah was 13, her letters were full of genuine gratitude for time spent together, not for material objects. "Thanks, Mom, for teaching me to ride a bike. Thanks, Mom, for making pancakes with me on Sundays. Thanks, Mom, for reading me stories before bed." But around the age of 14, when I started working extra shifts to give her better opportunities, the tone changed radically. Her expressions of affection became transactional. "Thanks, Mom, for the new phone. Thanks, Mom, for the designer clothes. Thanks, Mom, for the money for the field trip." Without realizing it, I had replaced my emotional presence with material presence, and Sarah had learned to associate my love with my ability to buy things. The second day, I decided to do something I had never done: calculate exactly how much money I had spent on Sarah over the last 8 years. I gathered all the receipts, bank statements, and transfer confirmations. The final figure took my breath away. $324,000. It wasn't just the amount that shocked me, but the pattern it revealed. Every year, my spending on her had increased exponentially, but the frequency of our conversations had decreased proportionally. More money meant less time together. More gifts equaled less genuine affection. I made a rough chart on a piece of paper, plotting annual spending against the number of phone calls, visits, and shared dinners. The lines crossed at the exact point where she met Richard. From that moment on, my expenses skyrocketed while our personal contact plummeted. During those hours of mathematical analysis of our relationship, I experienced something like a spiritual awakening. I realized I had been financing my own irrelevance in my daughter's life. Every dollar I sent her was another step toward my eventual emotional discard. The third day, I dedicated myself to an activity that terrified me but that I knew was necessary: imagining my life without Sarah. For years, I had lived completely focused on her, defining my identity exclusively through my role as her mother. But now I had to face a fundamental question. Who was Frances Martinez beyond being Sarah's mom? I started listing all the things I had stopped doing, all the dreams I had postponed, all the opportunities I had rejected to be available for her. The list was surprisingly long and painful to read. I had turned down a job promotion that required frequent travel because I didn't want to be away from Sarah. I had declined invitations to go out with colleagues because weekends were for my daughter. I had canceled personal vacations because that money was better invested in her needs. I had avoided romantic relationships because no man would understand the priority I had to give my daughter. For 25 years, I had lived like a satellite orbiting planet Sarah. My entire universe was defined by her orbit. But now, with the perspective my new financial situation gave me and the painful clarity of her rejection, I could see how toxic that dynamic had been for both of us. That afternoon, I called my brother, Charles, with whom I had lost frequent contact precisely because I always prioritized Sarah. His surprise was evident when he heard my voice. "Francis, what a miracle! I thought you'd moved to another planet," he said with that affectionate irony that had always characterized him. "How's the princess? I bet she's married and made you a grandmother by now." I told him briefly about the wedding and my exclusion, without mentioning the inheritance, of course. His reaction was immediate and brutally honest. "Sister, I told you years ago. You were raising a spoiled girl who was going to break your heart, but you never listened to me." Charles was right. Multiple people over the years had tried to warn me about the problematic patterns they saw in my relationship with Sarah. Coworkers, friends, even my own family. But I had interpreted all those warnings as envy or misunderstanding. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Charles continued. "It's not that Sarah is a bad person. It's that you never taught her to value what really matters. You taught her that love can be bought, that affection has a price, that relationships are business transactions." His words hurt because they were absolutely true. Without malicious intent, I had raised my daughter to see me as a service provider instead of a mother who deserved unconditional love. That night, as I looked through the photographs of our life together, I noticed something I had never seen before. In her childhood photos, Sarah looked directly into my eyes with genuine adoration, but in the more recent photos, her attention was always focused on the gift she had just received, not on me. There was one particularly revealing picture from her 20th birthday. I had given her an expensive necklace that I had gone into debt for 3 months to buy. In the photo, she was smiling radiantly, looking at the necklace in the mirror, while I appeared in the background, blurry and clearly ignored. That image became a perfect metaphor for our relationship. I was always in the background, blurry, irrelevant, while she focused on the material objects I provided. During those 3 days, I also made an important practical decision. I registered my inheritance with an independent financial advisor, setting up a trust that would guarantee me monthly income for the rest of my life without touching the principal. I wanted to ensure that my new wealth was managed responsibly, not spent impulsively on desperate attempts to win back my daughter's affection. By the end of the 3rd day, I had reached an inner peace I hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in decades, I felt completely free from external expectations. I no longer needed Sarah's approval to feel worthy as a person. I no longer depended on her presence to define my identity. When my phone rang that night and I saw Sarah's name on the screen, announcing her return from her trip, I was already a completely different woman. I answered with a calmness that surprised even myself. "Mom, we're back. I want to come see you tomorrow for that talk you mentioned." "Perfect, Sarah. I'll expect you at 3 in the afternoon." I hung up without adding the usual desperate words. "I missed you so much. So glad you're back. I wish we could have talked sooner." I simply confirmed the appointment and ended the call. That night, I slept better than I had in months, knowing that I was finally ready to set the boundaries I should have set years ago. On Tuesday, at 2:47 the afternoon, 13 minutes before our agreed-upon meeting, I heard the desperate sound of someone pounding on my door, as if their life depended on it. It wasn't the polite, spaced-out knocks I'd expect from a scheduled visit. It was the frantic hammering of someone on the verge of desperation. When I opened the door, the sight that greeted me was shocking. Sarah was a complete wreck. Her perfectly styled hair looked disheveled, as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. Her makeup was smudged from tears, creating dark streaks under her swollen eyes. The elegant clothes she always wore were wrinkled, as if she had slept in them. But what caught my attention the most was the yellow envelope she held in her trembling hands. She clutched it to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her knuckles were white from the force of her grip, and I could see her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Mom," she said in a broken voice, "I need to talk to you, urgently." Her words came out in ragged breaths, interrupted by sobs she was trying to control. I invited her in, but instead of heading to the living room as she usually did, she just stood in the entryway, as if she didn't have the strength to take another step. Her eyes, normally cold and calculating in our recent encounters, now showed a genuine terror I hadn't seen since she was a child. "What's wrong, Sarah?" I asked, with the calm I had cultivated during my days of reflection. A part of me wanted to run to her, hug her, console her as I had done 1,000 times when she was little. But something kept me in place, observing the situation with a newfound clarity. "It's about Richard, about us, about everything," she mumbled, then held the yellow envelope out to me. "This arrived at our apartment this morning. When I opened it, Mom, when I saw what was inside, I thought I was going to faint." The envelope was thick, clearly containing multiple documents. It had the letterhead of a prestigious law firm in the city, the kind that represented the country's most important companies, the kind of mail that only arrives when something truly serious is happening. "Can you tell me what it says?" I asked, keeping my physical distance but remaining emotionally present. I didn't step forward to comfort her as I would have instinctively in the past. This time, I waited for her to take the lead. Sarah walked to the sofa with faltering steps and collapsed onto it more than sat down. She opened the envelope with trembling hands and pulled out a set of legal documents I recognized immediately. Lawsuits, foreclosure notices, bankruptcy filings. "Richard's family business is bankrupt," she began in a monotone voice, as if reading from a newspaper. "They've been hiding massive losses for the last 2 years. They falsified financial reports, invented non-existent contracts, manipulated their accounting records." As she spoke, she placed document after document on the coffee table. Each paper she revealed made the picture worse. Lawsuits for fraud, investigations for money laundering, orders to freeze assets, international warrants. "But that's not the worst part, Mom," she continued, her voice breaking completely. "The worst part is that Richard knew everything. He knew the company was bankrupt when he proposed to me. He knew they desperately needed money." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in my mind with devastating clarity. Richard's sudden interest in my daughter, the questions about my financial situation, the rush to formalize the marriage, the deliberate exclusion from the wedding to prevent me from having direct information about their plans. "Sarah," I said gently, "are you saying that Richard married you for financial reasons?" She nodded as tears streamed freely down her cheeks. "The lawyers explained that the marriage protects them legally in a way. If the authorities seize the family's assets in the names of spouses or children have special protections." She pulled another document from the envelope, this one with her name clearly visible at the top. "Look at this, Mom. 2 days after our wedding, Richard had me sign papers to put properties and bank accounts in my name. He told me it was for tax optimization, and I trusted him completely. The document showed transfers of properties valued in the millions, all moved into my daughter's name immediately after the marriage. Sarah had been turned into a front without even knowing it. "But there's more," she continued, her voice growing smaller. "The investigators discovered that part of the money they used to fund the wedding was stolen from employee pensions. Mom, my wedding was paid for with money from retirees who lost their savings." The irony was so cruel it nearly choked me. My daughter had excluded me from her wedding out of shame for my modest financial status, only to discover it had been funded with money stolen from people even more humble than me. "And what does Richard say about all this?" I asked, though I already imagined the answer. "He disappeared," she replied with a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Yesterday morning, when the first legal documents arrived, he left, saying he had to handle some urgent business at the office. He hasn't come back. His phone is off. His parents say they don't know where he is." Sarah took out her phone and showed me an endless list of missed calls, all to Richard's number. "I've tried to contact him 7 times in the last 24 hours. Nothing." The pattern was devastatingly clear. Richard had used my daughter as a legal shield to protect his criminal family's assets, and once the legal papers started arriving, he had fled, leaving her to face the consequences alone. "The lawyers told me that since the properties are in my name, I am legally responsible for the associated debts," Sarah continued. "They can seize everything. The apartment where we live, the car, even the clothes and jewelry Richard gave me." She pulled the last document from the envelope, and this one sent a chill down my spine. It was an estimate of the total debt that now legally fell on my daughter. $4,2 million. "Mom," she said, looking me directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "I'm completely ruined. But not just financially. Legally, they could charge me with complicity in money laundering. I could go to jail." The silence that followed was heavy and complex. A part of me felt a dark satisfaction watching the superficial world she had chosen over me crumble so spectacularly. But a larger part, the part that would always be her mother no matter what, felt a deep pain for her suffering. "What do you need from me, Sarah?" I finally asked. Her answer broke my heart. "I don't know, Mom. For the first time in my life, I have no idea what to do, and I have no one else in the world who can help me. No one else in the world." After years of rejecting me, being ashamed of me, preferring the company of wealthy strangers, she finally acknowledged that I was the only person who genuinely cared about her well-being. That yellow envelope didn't just contain legal documents. It contained the brutal evidence that every decision she had made to distance herself from me had been catastrophically wrong. After Sarah admitted she had no one else in the world, a silence fell that seemed to last forever. It was one of those moments where time stands still, and you can physically feel the dynamic between two people changing for good. My daughter sat before me, vulnerable and completely broken, expecting me to be her savior, just as I had been her entire life. But this time was different. I was different. "Sarah," I said with a serenity that surprised me, "before we talk about how to help you, I need you to answer some questions with complete honesty." She looked up, surprised by my tone. For years, she was used to me immediately rushing to solve her problems without asking uncomfortable questions. This time, she detected something different in my voice, a firmness she didn't recognize. "Of course, Mom, whatever you need to know," she answered quickly, with the desperate haste of someone who knows they are in an extremely vulnerable position. "I want you to explain exactly when and why you decided I wasn't good enough to be at your wedding," I began, maintaining a calm but direct tone. "And I want the whole truth, not a softened version to protect my feelings." The color drained from her face. It was clear she had hoped we would focus exclusively on her current crisis, not the wounds she had inflicted on me. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, looking for a way to avoid the conversation. "Mom, do we really have to talk about that right now? I'm facing very serious legal problems and—" "Now more than ever," I interrupted firmly. "If you expect me to risk my financial stability to save you from this situation, I need to fully understand how we got here." Sarah fell silent for several minutes, wringing her hands and visibly struggling with conflicting emotions. Finally, she began to speak in a barely audible voice. "It was Richard's mother's idea," she admitted without looking at me. "When we started planning the wedding, she suggested we keep the guest list exclusive to create the right atmosphere." "And you agreed immediately?" I pressed. "No, not exactly," she replied, her voice growing even smaller. "At first I told them my mom had to be there, but then Mrs. Villanueva started asking questions. About your job, your financial situation, your education level. The questions I had feared being asked for years, the same ones that had kept me awake at night, wondering if I would ever be good enough for the world my daughter wanted to belong to." "Go on," I said when she paused. She explained that weddings in her social circle were strategic events, not just family celebrations, that the guests were carefully selected to create important networking opportunities for the future, and that what, Sarah? That having guests from very different socioeconomic levels could create discomfort for the other attendees. She finished the sentence in a barely audible whisper. The brutal honesty of her words hit me like a physical slap. Not only had she decided to exclude me, she had allowed a stranger to assess my worth as a person based solely on my bank account, and she had accepted that assessment as valid. "And what did Richard think about this?" I continued to probe. He supported her," she admitted with fresh tears. "He told me he understood it was a difficult decision, but that it was important to think about our future as a couple and the impressions we wanted to make. Did you ever wonder how I would feel, being excluded from the most important day of your life?" This question broke her completely. She began to sob uncontrollably, covering her face with her hands. "Yes, Mom, of course I thought about it, but I convinced myself it was temporary. That once we were established as a couple, you could become part of our social circle. Do you realize what you're actually telling me?" I asked. "That you were willing to sacrifice my dignity temporarily for social convenience." "It wasn't like that, Mom," I thought. "Sarah, I want you to tell me something else," I interrupted. "In the last 2 years, did you ever invite me to do anything with you that wasn't in private? Did you ever proudly introduce me as your mother in front of your new friends?" The silence that followed was her answer. We both knew that ever since she started moving in wealthier circles, I had been relegated to private meetings, discreet dinners, phone calls when no one else could hear. "I also want you to explain why you never publicly thanked me for the sacrifices I made to pay for your education," I continued. "In your graduation speech, you mentioned professors, classmates, even the university itself, but you never mentioned the woman who mortgaged her future to pay for your studies." "Mom, Don't interrupt me. I want you to really process what I'm asking." My voice remained calm, but there was an authority in it Sarah had never heard before. "I want to understand if at any point in the last few years you felt genuine gratitude for what I sacrificed for you, or if you just saw it as something I was supposed to do." This question forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. For several minutes, she visibly struggled with her thoughts before answering. I think I started to see it as normal," she finally admitted. "As something that parents just do for their children, not as extraordinary sacrifices that deserved special recognition." "And when, exactly, did you start to feel ashamed of me?" This question struck her like lightning. Her eyes widened, and she tried to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't deny something we both know is true. I want to know when it started, and why." After a long pause, she answered with an honesty that broke my heart. "When I started college and saw how my classmates' families lived, their parents had luxury cars, big houses, international vacations, and I started to feel like your lifestyle reflected poorly on me, even though you knew that modest lifestyle was the direct result of spending all my money on you." "Yes," she whispered, and that simple word contained years of pain and truth. I knew it was irrational and unfair, but I couldn't help feeling that way. "One more question, Sarah. Did you ever, during these last few years, genuinely worry about my happiness? Did you wonder if I was lonely, if I had my own dreams, if I needed emotional support?" The silence that followed was deafening. We both knew the answer, but I needed to hear it from her lips. "No," she finally answered, with a brutal honesty that shattered us both. "I was so focused on my own life, on my own goals, that I never stopped to think of you as a whole person with your own needs." These painful confessions had cleared the air between us in a way that years of superficial conversations never could. For the first time in a long time, we were being completely honest with each other. "Now," I said, "we can talk about how to help you." After Sarah admitted her mistakes and motivations with brutal honesty, I sat in silence for several minutes that felt like hours. An epic battle was raging in my mind between two versions of myself: the desperate mother I had been for decades, willing to sacrifice everything for her daughter, and the renewed woman who had emerged during those days of deep reflection. The temptation to reveal my inheritance was overwhelming. I could perfectly picture the scene. "Sarah, don't worry about a thing. It turns out I inherited $13 million on your wedding day. I can pay off all your debts and solve all your problems." Her gratitude would be immense, her regret genuine, her love renewed, but it would also be completely artificial. "Mom," she said in a trembling voice, interrupting my thoughts, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything I just confessed. I know I've been a terrible, ungrateful, selfish daughter, but I have nowhere else to go." I stood up from the sofa and walked to the window, turning my back to her as I organized my thoughts. From there, I could see the park where I had walked on her wedding day, the place where I had received the life-changing call. The irony of it all was extraordinary. "Sarah, I need to ask you a few more questions before I decide how to proceed," I said without turning to face her. "And I need completely honest answers, not what you think I want to hear." "Anything, Mom. Anything. If I had the financial resources to save you from this situation, but I set strict conditions for my help, would you be willing to accept them, no matter how uncomfortable they might be for you?" There was a pause before she answered, and in her silence, I could hear the internal struggle between her desperation and her pride. "Yes, Mom. Any conditions you set, even if those conditions required you to completely change your lifestyle, your priorities, your way of relating to me?" "Yes," she answered more quickly this time. I turned to look at her directly. "And what if I decided that the best thing for both of us is for you to face the consequences of your decisions without my financial help? What if I believed that rescuing you again would only perpetuate the toxic patterns between us?" This question struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her eyes filled with genuine terror, not just because of her legal situation, but at the real possibility that I, for the first time in her life, would say no. "Mom, please," she began, her voice cracking. "I know I deserve to face consequences, but this could completely ruin my life. I could be imprisoned, I could lose everything, and be scarred forever." "Like how I lost my daughter years ago and was scarred forever?" I replied with a calm that surprised me. "Like how I lost my dignity every time you treated me like an emotional ATM?" Sarah completely broke down, crying in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. But this time, I didn't rush to comfort her. This time, I kept my distance and waited for her to process the reality of her situation. "What do I have to do?" she asked between sobs. "Tell me what I have to do for you to help me." "First," I said, returning to my seat but maintaining physical distance, "you need to understand that if I decide to help you, it won't be like before. It won't be a blank check. It will be a gradual process with constant supervision and clear expectations." She nodded desperately. "Second, you will have to completely cut ties with the entire Villanueva social circle. No more contact with those people, no more attempts to maintain that lifestyle, no more shame about your humble origins." "Of course, Mom. I understand now that whole world was an illusion." "Third, you will have to move back to this neighborhood, to a modest apartment that I choose, and live on a strict budget that I will supervise monthly." This condition was clearly harder for her to accept, but after a few seconds she nodded. "Fourth, you will look for a job immediately. A real job with a modest salary where you will learn the value of money earned through your own effort." "Yes, Mom." "And fifth, the most important one. We will rebuild our relationship from scratch, but this time with clearly defined roles. I will be your mother, not your employee. You will be my daughter, not my boss. And if you ever treat me with the contempt you've shown me these past years, all help will stop immediately." Sarah sat up on the sofa, drying her tears, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her eyes I had missed terribly. Genuine respect for me. "Mom, I accept all your conditions, but I need to ask you something that's been tormenting me since I got here." "Go ahead. Do you really have the financial resources to help me with a debt of over $4 million? Because if you don't, I need to start exploring other legal options immediately." This was the moment of truth. I could keep my secret and find gradual ways to help her within my apparent means, or I could reveal my inheritance and solve everything instantly. For several minutes that felt like an eternity. I weighed both options. Finally, I made a decision that surprised even myself. "Sarah, I'm going to be completely honest with you about something I had decided to keep secret," I began, and I saw her eyes light up with desperate hope. "On the same day as your wedding, while you were celebrating without me, I received a call from the United States informing me that I had inherited a considerable sum of money from my Uncle Robert." Her expression instantly changed to a mix of shock, hope, and what looked like relief. "How much money, Mom?" "Enough to solve all your legal and financial problems," I answered, without giving specific figures. "But here's the important part. I had decided never to tell you." "Why?" "Because I wanted to know if you would ever love me for who I really am, not for what I can give you. I wanted to know your true feelings for me, stripped of any financial motivation." Sarah fell silent, processing the complexity of what I had just confessed. "And now that you know the truth," I continued, "what do you feel? Relief that your problems are solved? Guilt because you rejected a millionaire mother? Or genuine regret for having hurt me as a person?" Her answer would completely define the future of our relationship and determine exactly how I would use my new wealth to help her, or not. "Mom," she said with fresh tears, but with an honesty I recognized as authentic, "I feel ashamed. Not relief, not excitement about the money. Deep shame for having been so blind, so cruel to you." "Ashamed of what, specifically?" "Of having wasted years rejecting the only person who truly loved me while chasing superficial fantasies with people who used me exactly like I used you." For the first time in this conversation, I saw something in her eyes that gave me real hope. Genuine regret. Not calculated for convenience, but born from an authentic understanding of the damage she had caused. It was time to decide how to use my newfound power. For revenge, for an unconditional rescue, or for something else entirely. After hearing the genuine remorse in Sarah's voice, I sat down again across from her and made a decision that would forever change the dynamic of our mother-daughter relationship. It wouldn't be the unconditional rescue of the past, nor the cruel abandonment that a part of me craved as revenge. It would be something completely different. A conscious reconstruction based on mutual respect. "Sarah," I began, my voice firm but warm, "I am going to help you, but not in the way you expect, or as I have before. This time, we will establish an emotional and financial contract that benefits us both and allows us to truly heal." Her eyes showed confusion mixed with cautious hope. "A contract? What do you mean?" "I mean, we are going to handle this situation like responsible adults, not like the desperate mother and manipulative daughter we have been for years." I stood up and got a notebook where I had been organizing my thoughts during those days of reflection. First, I will contact the best criminal defense attorneys in the country to handle your case. I will pay all the necessary legal fees to prove that you are a victim of fraud, not an accomplice to money laundering. The relief on her face was immediate, but I held up a hand to continue. However, the money to pay the debts Richard put in your name will be a loan from me. You will not receive it as a gift. We will sign a legal promissory note with minimal interest and a 20-year repayment plan. What? She asked, surprised. But Mom, I'll never be able to make enough money to pay back $4 million in my entire life. That's where the second part of our agreement comes in, I continued, unperturbed. I am offering you a job at the accounting consulting firm I am going to establish with part of my inheritance. You will start as an administrative assistant with a modest but fair salary. Sarah's expression went from relief to total confusion. You're starting a company? You're going to be my boss? Exactly. For years, you were the one who set the terms of our relationship. Now, I will be the one defining the terms of your personal and financial recovery. I sat down again and looked her directly in the eye. Sarah, for 25 years, I gave you everything without teaching you the value of anything. I rescued you from every problem without letting you learn from your mistakes. I loved you unconditionally without demanding basic respect. That ends today. Does that mean you don't love me unconditionally anymore? She asked in a small voice. It means my love will remain unconditional, but my financial and emotional support now come with very clear conditions. You need to earn my trust back, step by step. Over the next 2 hours, we established the rules of our new relationship. Sarah would live in a 2-bedroom apartment that I would rent in the same neighborhood where she grew up. She would have a strict monthly budget that included food, transportation, and basic expenses, but no luxuries. You will work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You will learn accounting, administration, customer service. You will train from the ground up like any new employee, I explained as she took notes with a seriousness I had never seen in her. And on weekends? She asked. On Saturdays we will have lunch together, but you will choose the restaurant within a budget I set. Sundays will be for family activities, cooking together, walking in the park, actually talking about our lives. For the first time during the entire conversation, Sarah smiled genuinely. Like when I was little? Better than when you were little, because now we are both adults who can have deep, meaningful conversations. The following months were the most transformative of our lives. Sarah moved into the modest apartment I had chosen, donating or selling all the luxury items she associated with her previous life. At first, it was hard for her to adjust to public transportation, home-cooked meals, and the absence of luxuries, but gradually, she began to find satisfaction in simplicity. Her job at my new company, Martinez and Associates Consulting, was a huge challenge at first. For years, she had lived without structure or real responsibilities, so sticking to a schedule and completing specific tasks was exhausting for her. But she also discovered something she had never experienced: the pride of earning her own money. Mom, she told me one Friday after her first full month of work. When I got my first paycheck, I felt something strange. It was a small amount compared to what I used to get from you, but it made me happier. Why do you think that is? Because it was yours, I replied. You earned it with your own effort. You didn't manipulate it out of someone else. Our Saturday lunches became the most anticipated moment of the week for both of us, without the financial pressure that had characterized our previous encounters. We could talk about everything: her fears, my postponed dreams, the family we had lost sight of, our plans for the future. You know what's the weirdest part of all this? She asked me during one of those lunches, 3 months after starting her new life. I'm poorer financially than I've been in years, but I feel richer as a person. Explain that to me. Before, I had money, but I had no dignity. I had expensive things, but I had no peace of mind. I had a rich husband, but I had no real love. Now I have fewer things, but the ones I have are authentic. The legal process against Richard and his family was resolved favorably. The top lawyers I hired convincingly proved that Sarah had been the victim of an elaborate scam. The properties in her name were transferred back to the state to compensate the fraud victims, releasing her from criminal liability. Richard was arrested, trying to flee the country with false documents. During the trial, it became clear that he had specifically identified and manipulated Sarah because his private investigations had confirmed I had limited resources and would be easy to handle. The irony of that failed strategy still makes me smile. A year after that day with the yellow envelope, Sarah had changed so profoundly she seemed like a completely different person. She had learned to value authentic relationships over superficial connections. She preferred a home-cooked dinner with me to any of the exclusive social events of her past life. "Mom," she said during our family Sunday while we cooked together as we had when she was a child, "I want to formally apologize for all the years I wasted being so blind and cruel to you." "You've already shown me with your actions this past year," I replied. "Verbal apologies are easy. Real changes in behavior are what truly count." "Will you ever be able to forgive me completely?" "Sarah, I forgave you the day you made the decision to truly change. But more important than my forgiveness is that you learn to forgive yourself and not repeat these patterns with other people." 2 years later, when Sarah had consistently demonstrated her personal transformation, we had one final conversation about the money. "Do you know what I've decided to do with the rest of my inheritance?" I asked her during one of our Sundays. "What?" "Create a scholarship fund for children of single mothers who want to study accounting or business. It will be managed by our company, which will no longer be just mine. I'm making you a partner once you've finished paying off your debt." Her eyes filled with tears of genuine gratitude and pride. "Do you really trust me with something so important?" "I trust the woman you've become, and I trust that you understand that money is a tool to create value, not to buy love." Today, 5 years after that day that changed our lives, Sarah and I have the mother-daughter relationship we should have always had. It's a relationship based on mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and authentic love that doesn't depend on financial transactions. She is no longer the superficial young woman who was ashamed of her origins. I am no longer the desperate mother who confused providing with loving. We both learned that the best relationships are built on foundations of mutual respect, not on economic or emotional dependence. And although we will never get back the years we lost to toxic patterns, every day we build together is proof that it's never too late to create something authentic and valuable. True love, we learned, is not bought or begged for. It is cultivated, nurtured, and protected by setting healthy boundaries that allow both people to grow and flourish.